In a divided world, how do you get 195 countries all on the same page? From Sao Paulo to Seoul, the Financial Times is the common thread connecting bright minds. It's read in every country recognised by the United Nations, by people who need trusted insight to make confident decisions. And with reporters in over 40 international bureaux, you can trust the FT to tell the global stories that matter, clearly and without compromise. Read more and subscribe at ft.com.
There is something unusually resonant in Italy, of all places, considering what it means to be a citizen. It is to an Italian, of sorts, that we owe much of our conception of what citizenship is. In 70 BC, a lawyer called Marcus Tullius Cicero spoke for the prosecution in the trial of Gaius Verres, a former governor of Sicily on the hook for corruption, extortion and general misrule. Yes, just imagine such things occurring in Sicily, etc. Cicero's scorching oration indicted Verres on a number of counts, and his case stuck. Verres' own counsel suggested to his client that he'd be better off scarpering into exile than sticking around to see how the trial panned out. Cicero was especially furious about the fate of one wretch named Publius Gavius, who had been beaten and crucified on Verres' whim, despite his repeated whimpering of the phrase which should have put an instant stop to any such extrajudicial maltreatment. Civis Romanus sum. I am a Roman citizen. The notion of who is or is not a citizen of Rome's successor state, Italy, has recently become a vexed one. This week, Italians have gone to the polls to, well, actually scratch that. Italians have not gone to the polls, by and large, at least not in sufficient numbers to validate the referendum in which they had been invited to vote.
A referendum in Italy on easing access to citizenship and boosting worker protection failed due to low turnout. Italian authorities said slightly less than 30% of eligible voters had cast their ballots at the end of 2 days of voting.
A 50% turnout was required to make any result binding, and fewer than 1 in 3 showed up. Whatever Italians do or do not believe are conditions of citizenship, an irrepressible zeal for democratic participation does not appear to rank highly among them. Which leaves us to contemplate why this referendum was called and why nobody much could be bothered with it. There were actually 5 questions on the docket. 4 pertained to the repeal of 4 arguably pernickety labour laws and can be safely assessed a niche domestic interest. It was the 5th on Italian citizenship that occasioned the greatest domestic angst and has the wider international resonance. The proposal, moved by the smallish left-wing More Europe party and endorsed by a confederacy of fellow travellers, wanted to halve the years of Italian residency necessary for a non-EU foreigner to apply for Italian citizenship, from 10 years down to 5. This initiative, and stick with us on this, owed much to the women's volleyball tournament at the 2024 Paris Olympics.
And that'll do it, all over in 3 sets. Italy, Olympic gold medalists, and as near a perfect a game as you can possibly play on the biggest stage of all.
Italy took gold in that event, thanks in no small part to the heroics of star players Paola Egonu and Miriam Silla, respectively of Nigerian and Ivorian descent, who had both struggled to acquire Italian citizenship despite being Italian-born, Italian-raised. Even children of lawful Italian immigrants can only apply to become citizens when they turn 18 and have to demonstrate that they have lived in Italy continuously since birth. The 2 volleyballers are hardly alone in this frustration. About 11% of students at Italian schools are foreign nationals. If the vote had passed, it would have made perhaps 2.5 million people instantly eligible to apply for formal recognition as Italians. And this, one cannot help but suspect, may have been why Italy's current government, which is of a conservative nationalist bent, was unenthused. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni did grudgingly visit a polling station but made a point of not voting. Others in her coalition were less subtle in their pre-referendum derision and post-result gloating. Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini suggested that the path to naturalisation actually needed to be strewn with more and greater obstacles. It is difficult to believe at this point in his career that Salvini cares about anything less than having his inconsistencies and hypocrisies noted, but nevertheless, one might have hoped that an Italian would be a bit more sympathetic to people perhaps impelled by economic circumstance to make a better life elsewhere and encountering prejudice and hostility as they do, as millions of Italians did during the 20th century in particular. In many cases, they took their culture and their language with them. In not one instance did they fatally undermine the countries they arrived in. Nevertheless, many Western countries are presently beset by dispute over who should be called a citizen and in what circumstances, and in general it is probably correct to suspect that those most visibly agitated are largely concerned with, shall we say, appearances. The argument boils down to whether citizenship should be conferred by ancestry or birthplace, blood or soil. The newer world, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, has tended to take the attitude that if you were born here, you're one of us. Older European countries, in the main, have prioritised familial ties, Italy especially in the interests of maintaining its vast diaspora. In fairness to Italy, it is not presently ungenerous. In 2023, 213,500 people became Italian, fully 1/5 of the EU total. The argument, at least on the rare occasions it is conducted in good faith, is how to find a balance in a swiftly changing world. By way of further illustrating how arbitrary this can all be, last year President Javier Milei of Argentina applied for and received Italian citizenship. His grandparents were Italian migrants. In Australia in 2017, after the High Court determined that dual citizens were not, on reflection, supposed to be holding elected office, 8 Australian senators and 7 MPs were obliged to stand down. Among them, the bemused Resources Minister of the time, Matt Canavan, who discovered that he was somehow Italian, despite having had not the least idea of this and indeed having never set foot in Italy.
Parliament's most recent casualty of dual citizenship has for the first time taken questions over how he accidentally became Italian.
My mum acted with what she thought was my best interests and had no idea of the constitutional ramifications of any of this.
Australia's current Prime Minister, incidentally, is the half-Italian Anthony Albanese, who would certainly be entitled to claim Italian citizenship if he wanted it. Somehow, for some scarcely imaginable reason or other, it is difficult to picture Matteo Salvini objecting. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.